All right, for more on this, we are joined by Republican Congressman from New York and member of the House Foreign Affairs and Financial Services Committees, Mike Lawler. Congressman, thanks for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Jackie.
Thank you. I just want to begin where Lucas left off, which is with your colleague, Corey Mills, filing an article of impeachment against the president for withholding these shipments of thousands of bombs. You know, as he noted, Reagan did this before. George H.W. Bush did this before. Does what President Biden did, in your mind, rise to the level of a high crime or misdemeanor?
Look, I think what President Biden is doing at this moment of war is unconscionable. And I think, as Corey Mills pointed out, he is putting electoral politics ahead of the safety and security of one of our closest allies in the world. But we're less than 6 months away from an election, and I trust the judgment of the American people. I think what the Democrats did in 2019 and 20, politicizing impeachment, did not serve the country well. I don't think it serves us well this close to an election to be engaged in this. I think the objective here is to make sure that Israel gets the weaponry and the ammunitions that it needs to prosecute this war against Hamas, a terrorist organization. I think Joe Biden should be embarrassed and ashamed of himself for allowing electoral politics to take precedent over the safety and well-being of the Israeli people and the state of Israel.
So what I'm hearing from you, just to clarify, is that no on impeachment at this point, correct?
Oh, correct. Look, we're less than 6 months away from an election. The American people are going to decide who the next president is. And frankly, you know, Joe Biden's foreign policy has been a disaster, starting with the withdrawal in Afghanistan and now here with the withholding of weapons to Israel. And I think the American people will render a judgment on that.
I want to move on to ask you about these these campus protests that have devolved into displays of anti-Semitism across the country. And you just had a really wild development at Sacramento State University, where the school has acquiesced to these anti-Israel protesters' demands and met their demand to divest and condemn genocide, ethnic cleansing, and human rights violations. They made changes to university policies, including issuing this statement. They say, this is what the president wrote: "We believe it's important that our efforts to fund students' education do not rely upon us benefiting from companies that profit from ethnic cleansing, genocide, or human rights violations." So in a way, you know, really making a statement about what is happening in Gaza and calling Israel genocidal. Is that how you understand this?
It's quite remarkable. You know, these are the same institutions that have no problem taking foreign investment from countries that actually engage in human rights violations. Israel is not an apartheid state. Israel is the only multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy in the Middle East. Iran, China, Russia, these countries are engaged in an unholy alliance that seeks to undermine and destabilize the United States and the free world. China is the biggest purchaser of Iranian petroleum. Iranian petroleum sales up $88 billion since Joe Biden took office. That's what funds Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. The fact that you have students engage in these protests that are claiming we are Hamas, the fact that Hamas, Iran, and China have endorsed these protests speaks volumes to the absurdity of them. And the fact that these institutions are acquiescing to the demands of petulant children is an embarrassment. We need to crack down on the anti-Semitism that is running rampant on these universities and college campuses. It's why I fought to pass the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which codifies President Trump's executive order into law back in 2019 that requires the Department of Education to adopt the IRA working definition. That is what we have to be doing at this moment. People are entitled to free speech. They're not entitled to engage in violence or threats of violence against individuals simply because they're Jewish.
Well, and we should note that, this decision really has no impact on the war. The sweeping change to the language of the university policy would implicate potentially their involvement with companies that deal with China, which is actually conducting a genocide against the Uyghurs. But caving to these, 100 or so kids after 8 days and making these broad changes is pretty notable, especially in light of the State Department report. And we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you, because the State Department has found, basically, that Israel is lawfully using weapons provided by the U.S. government, while very critical of Israel's conduct and calling for Israel to do more. The State Department found that Israel's use of U.S. weapons is fully compliant and that weapons shipments can continue. That's despite President Biden withholding them. What's your take on that?
Again, Jackie, the president's decision and the remarks by Senator Schumer calling for regime change and Nancy Pelosi calling for Prime Minister Netanyahu to step down are all political. It's rooted in the fact that they are concerned about electoral politics in Michigan and Minnesota. It has nothing to do with how Israel has actually prosecuted the war. I think Israel has taken great care to adhere to international law. Hamas uses innocent Palestinians as human shields. They don't care if innocent Palestinians die. They use that as a battle cry. Hamas is a terrorist organization that needs to be eliminated. Israel has a right to defend themselves. Okay. And I remind everyone, the fastest way for a ceasefire to occur is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages. That is what President Biden should be demanding. That is what Democrats across America should be demanding. And that's what these protesters should be demanding.
And your colleagues have made that point, that telling Israel to pull back really doesn't give Hamas much incentive to do that. Mike Lawler, thank you so much, Congressman, for being with us. Appreciate your time this Saturday.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.